In this week's episode of the Financial Freeman podcast, you will see that as a result of inflation, you should not want to be a saver and you should want to be an investor.
What's this week's news story of the week?
This week, the banks are becoming a bit more generous and are increasing ever so slightly the amount of interest you can get in your bank account.
Oh,
Exactly. The rate now to lock your money away for 5 years is, do you want to guess?
No.
1.7%. Okay, you can now get a fixed 5 years for 1.7%.
And what was it?
Just above that. But can you remember what what inflation was? What is? We discussed this last
Yes,
week.
because I was listening.
Good, go on.
It should be 2% a year.
Yeah, but what was it last
year
month?
was 2.5.
Last month was 2.5.
Oh, last month.
Exact was 2.5. Very good. Okay.
So you're nearly in line with inflation.
Nearly, but you're still losing. So you're still losing 0.8% per month if your money stays in the bank. Which leads me on to a little story that I want to tell you. Okay, and this story is all about Jack. Okay, now poor Jack is 18 years of age, and his parents tragically died in a car crash.
Oh,
Yeah, whilst in the south of France.
little orphan.
Yeah, and in their will, they said that his grandpa was going to look after him, and I suppose the sorts of silver lining, not very much so at that time, but was that he was handed £1 million as a result of life insurance, $500,000.
I'd say that's a silver lining.
You can't, don't say. I hope your parents aren't
Well,
watching.
I'd rather the parents.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a silver lining.
Yeah, £500,000.
It's a thin.
Exactly. £500,000 each. So he's got £1 million. Okay. Now his grandpa was old school. He was like, well, you know what I would do, Jack? I would put that money in the bank. So you're only 20 years of age. Why not leave it in there for 50 years? You can retire at the age of 70, and you've got enough for your retirement. And Jack didn't really know any better. He'd not learned anything about finance.
You've not heard of you?
He'd not heard of me. He'd not learned anything about finance really in school. Bits and bobs about that saving is quite good. And he thought, right, I'm going to save. This sounds like a really good. So he found actually a longer term investment product with some obscure bank, and they eventually locked away the funds for 1% a year. And young Jack thought, great, so my money's going to grow.
Shame, because he could have got 1.7%.
Yeah, well, anyway, that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is that he worked really hard. He was actually a butcher, Jack the Butcher, they used to call him. He didn't, he spent the money that he earned from his work. He didn't earn a huge sum, but he spent that money because he knew he was safe. He knew he had this £1 million for retirement when he turned 70. That was the plan. Why would he need any other plan? He didn't have investments. Why does he need it? Jack the Butcher's going to be fine. Jack the Butcher with the inheritance, they all used to say. So 50 years on, and he pulls the money out the bank, and it's great. It's still there. It's somewhere like 1 million, and I think it was 1,100,000 by this point. Obviously, it had grown the 1%. Fantastic, but he was fairly oblivious in life, Jack. He didn't really know much. He knew the price of meat had gone up a bit, but he didn't really know much about him. He led a fairly modest life, and he suddenly realised that 1,100,000 that he'd got couldn't actually buy a lot.
A lot of meat.
A lot. Well, yeah, a bit of meat, but unfortunately, it wasn't anywhere near the value he thought because of inflation. What had actually happened is that the value of that 1.1, even though physically that's still what he got, couldn't actually buy anywhere near as much as what he thought. In fact, it could buy less than half of what he thought it was going to do. So really, it was as if he was saving about £400,000. Now, poor Jack was devastated. And his grandpa was no longer around. He couldn't turn around to him and say, what were you doing? And he had nothing else to do. And he carried on his life, living, unfortunately, fairly modestly. And that was the sorry story about Jack. And that really is a lesson for all of us in that currently, if you leave your money in the bank, let's just say it's at 0.5% interest, okay?
Even less than Jack.
It's even a lot less than Jack.
Why would you put it in for 0.5% interest?
Because because you don't want, let's just say you don't know when you're going to need your money. You might not want to leave your money in for a fixed period. Exactly. So let's just say you wanted access to that money, then you'd be doing very, very, very well to get even 0.5% at the current climate.
Wow.
Okay, that is actually the top rate. So you get that amount if you want to lock your money, if you want to keep your money there and have access to
quite
it.
Sarcastic speakers basically say the rate of interest per the rate of inflation. They're like, well, you may as well get this percent of your money, put it on a fire and burn it, and at least you'll get some kind of benefit from the heat that comes from the flames. But you're not kind of that way.
I'm not as dramatic, and I'm not going to burn our money, because I think you might be a bit sad. But that's it. Exactly that, though. You are, every year that you are putting money in saving money, it is going down because of inflation. So if inflation at 2.5%, let's just say. Okay, now it's going up, as we discussed last week. It's probably going to be higher than that. But let's just say it's and actually the real rate of inflation is a lot higher, and that's for another episode. But let's just say it's 2.5%, and you're getting 0.5% in the bank. How much is your money going down each year?
2%.
2%. That's it. So if you saved, let's just say you managed to save £100,000. Okay, suddenly that's 98,000 a year later. Okay, that metaphorically, it can buy £98,000 worth of goods at that point. Okay, you've lost notionally £2,000 as a result. Okay, you don't want to be doing that. A lot of people work hard to get £2,000. You know, by the time you've paid all your taxes and childcare or whatever, holidays, you know, you want that £2,000, and people spend hours and hours searching for coupons, etc., to make £2,000 or to save £2,000. And yet it's being frittered away every single year as a result of this system, inflation. And again, revisit last week's episode as to why that's happening. But you need to know that money in the bank is going down every single year as a result of what is happening, and probably only getting worse. Okay, the money is staying the same. The value of what they can buy is going down every single year. Okay, so savers are the real losers as a result of inflation. Okay, and you need to wake up to that and act accordingly. Okay, now next week we're going to discuss one of the ways of protecting yourself against inflation, which is property. There is also, though, and before we do that next week, I also just want to touch on another sort of class of people who may be losing as a result. Okay, and that is actually employees, because it's not always the case that where there is inflation that the real wages go up as in line. Now, there's complex economics at stake here, but actually from 2008 to 2016, real wages actually went down 5%.
What are real wages?
Essentially, wages minus inflation.
Right.
So wages went down in real terms 5%. So actually, forget about the saving malarkey. Why did you stop at 2016? It went up a tiny bit since then.
Right.
But actually, there's complex reasons as to why, and it's essentially because of this new gig economy. So people are supposed to be getting paid more, but actually being given less hours. The minimum wage came up. There's lots of kind of economics behind it, and too much to dive onto here. But actually, the wages aren't necessarily keeping up with inflation as well. So you're getting paid.
Have they ever?
Yes, before 2008, before the financial crash, wages were going up roughly about in line with inflation. Actually, a tiny bit ahead. So I think you're actually doing pretty well, and that's why people were generally becoming a lot more wealthy and wealthier. That's since 2008, the financial crash. That's gone in reverse. Mainly. Okay, so you need to know that employees.
This is just UK.
This is just UK. Yeah, I'm not sure about the rest of the world with this one. So employees by and large are missing out, but most importantly, savers are really, really, really struggling, and there is not much they can do because, as we discussed last week, government policy is staying the same. Okay, so it's a short episode this week, but it's just really, really important to know that is what's happening, and you need to do something about it. So stay tuned.
But before you take all your money out the bank, please note that the content of this podcast is for general information purposes and not a recommendation to act. Please contact us or an independent financial advisor if you would like to discuss matters further. You can contact us on gary.financialfreeman@gmail.com.